Today I will show you a biography, drama film from 2016 that's based on true events, titled Sully. Sully, a flight captain, sends a mayday signal to the control center because both of the engines have failed. His co-pilot Jeff informs him that they are too low as they descend towards New York City and try to maneuver through. The people on the plane are horrified as they fly past the residential towers and even graze one of them. He tells his co-pilot that he loves him and they crash. Sully wakes up gasping, "It was a dream." The news is reporting the successful landing of U.S. Airways Flight 1549 on the Hudson River, saving the lives of all 155 passengers, and the media is calling it a miracle. Yet he still is haunted by the incident. Sully and Jeff are called to a meeting with a board of people, the NTSB, who are investigating the incident. Charles documents the reason for their presence on tape. When he mentions the crash, Sully steps in and corrects him. It was a forced landing, they knew what they were trying to execute. It was not a crash. The big question is why he chose to land on the Hudson instead of simply returning to LaGuardia Airport. There simply was not enough altitude. When asked how he calculated that, he didn't. He relied on his experience from thousands of flights over 4 decades and eyeballed it. It is claimed that the left engine was idling and still functioning, but Sully disputes that and says he felt the failure of both engines. In the car, they discuss how they are trying to portray Sully as the bad guy while everyone else is saying the opposite. Even the cab driver praises him for his heroics. Sully is in contact with his wife Lori, who lives with their 2 daughters. She is distressed by all the reporters around her house who want a special segment on her husband. Even as he leaves the cab to go to his hotel, he is swarmed by reporters asking him questions such as how he feels about doing the impossible or being a miracle maker. They contact each other once again. Lori has been concerned for his well-being ever since the incident. He is overwhelmed by all the attention in the NTSB investigation. Sully calls Jeff, who is also anxious, and they decide to get some fresh air together. Jeff tells him about tomorrow's interview with the press. Sully is disappointed that after 42 years in his position, he will end up being judged on 208 seconds. Jeff reassures him by saying that the computer simulations will prove that his decision was right and they can return to their normal lives. The next day, Sully sits down for an interview with Katie Couric, who asks him how it feels to be seen as a hero. He says he does not, he was just doing his job. After he finishes the interview, he looks out the window and experiences another hallucination of his plane crashing into the city. Sully and Jeff meet with the NTSB again. They tell the pilots that one of the engines was idling and several tests were run in a simulator that proved it was possible and probable to return to LaGuardia. Sully denies this, saying he felt both engines give up, and Jeff backs him up, but the engineers say otherwise. And when asked for proof, there is none because the engine was damaged and sunk upon landing in the Hudson River. Basically, they say that Sully put the people on board in danger and caused substantial damages to the U.S. Airways. Later at the hotel, Sully calls Lori. She tells him about their financial situation and that she needs him to get back to work. They are both anxious. Sully tells her that he's worried that he might actually be wrong and the NTSB is right. Worst case scenario, that means immediate retirement with no pension, his life's work gone. This scares Lori. Then he explains his newly acquired information from the NTSB and she asks him why he did it, why he landed in the water. Back to the day of the incident, January 15, 2009. It was a normal day, the usual checks were made. Sully and Jeff take off. About 2 minutes after takeoff, a large flock of birds flies head-on into the engines, causing both of them to falter. Sully checks the readings and finds that both engines have lost thrust. The passengers begin to get extremely worried. He maintains contact with the control center and they try their best to clear the runways for landing. He realizes that they won't make it to any runway and makes the decision to land in the river. Sully then warns everyone on board to brace for impact. The flight attendants instruct the passengers to keep their heads down, stay down and brace. Sully once again contacts the control center and informs them that they will land in the Hudson. The flight then is lost from the radar. Sully and Skiles begin their descent onto Hudson. Back in the present, he finishes his call and jogs through Times Square. He runs by the aircraft carrier where an old jet rests. He has a flashback flying in a jet over a field with a trail of smoke, landing the jet safely and his companion commending his skills. The jet on the carrier is the same one he flew. Sully then goes to a bar, where the bartender recognizes him and gives him a drink named after him, Grey Goose with a splash of water. The men inside toast for him as the hero. He then watches coverage of the incident on TV. In another flashback to that day with a more detailed look at the passengers. As the plane descends, the passengers brace themselves for the worst, some writing to their loved ones, some praying, some telling their closest people their last wish. The plane lands on the river with no casualties and soon begins to fill with water. Sully orders everyone to evacuate the plane as the doors are opened and the rafts inflated. The people put on their life jackets and head outside, where they wait in the freezing cold for help. The ferry spots the plane and comes to their aid. They help the people on the right wing while the NY waterway boat comes from the left side and evacuates the people. An NYPD helicopter flies in and manages to help the people in the water. After checking the entire plane, Sully is the last to leave. Everyone has been safely evacuated and wrapped in blankets. Sully calls Lori to let her know he's okay, though she still has no idea what happened until Sully tells her to turn on the TV with their daughters. At the pier, Sully asks everyone for the count. There should be 155 people including the staff. He is distraught. The officers at the scene ask him to leave it to them and go. He is taken to a hospital. His supervisor Arnie comes in and informs him that all 155 souls on board survived. It's like a weight off his shoulders. Later he is taken to a hotel and one of the staff hugs him, leaving him stunned. Back in the present, a woman on the news says the timing was perfect for the ferry, for the NYPD units, and for the pilot, so Sully gets an idea. He calls Larry, one of the NTSB members, and asks him for a favor. He wants to reschedule the human simulations so they're done before his testimony, because he feels that with human pilots and not a computer the results will be different. If they show the same result, Sully will retire himself. Larry agrees to do whatever he can. Just before the hearing, Lori calls Sully in tears as it just hits her that he was one of the 155 people on board, and how horrified she is by this. After the call, Sully composes himself and enters the hearing room. He takes a seat and Charles begins the hearing. As requested by Sully, they performed a simulated landing using the same weather, altitude, and speed parameters. In the simulation, the pilots head straight for a runway immediately after the bird incident and land safely. Then they run a second scenario with Teterboro Airport, but the result is the same, a safe landing. Charles asks the pilots what they are trying to accomplish. Sully asks him if they can get serious now. Sully argues that they did not take into account the human factor, that it was a matter of life and death, and that none of the test pilots were under the same pressure that he and Jeff were. No one warned them that they would lose both engines at a lower altitude than any other jet in history. Sully argues that the pilots were instructed to head to the airport right after the bird strike, without taking into account the time for analysis and decision-making. He also asks how many practice runs they had. The pilot who landed at the second airport had 17 attempts before they got it right. Charles agrees to set the decision time to 35 seconds and they run the simulations again. This time both scenarios end in catastrophic failure. Now that they've seen what could have happened, Jeff suggests listening to what actually did. They listen to the audio recording from the cockpit for the first time. After the recording, Sully and Jeff step out and he tells Jeff his thoughts on the recording. He is really proud of their work and they did a great job, saving 155 lives. They return and resume the hearing. Elizabeth tells them that the left engine was finally recovered. It was completely destroyed just as Sully had stated, despite the previous assumption that it may have been operational. The recording is enough to prove to the board that Sully and Jeff did the right thing. After consulting experts in the field, Elizabeth came to the conclusion that everything would have gone wrong if Sully had been out of the picture. He disagrees, saying that Jeff and the flight attendants deserve credit for the landing as well as the rescue workers, who acted swiftly, making sure that everyone was taken care of. It took them only 24 minutes to rescue everyone.